Welcome back, everyone. Let's start with the karakia. I was thinking it's the first time I've done the karakia in a while. How exciting. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā tara tara ki tai. He hi ake ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, awari ora. I declare the meeting open. Welcome everyone to today's meeting of Kāwai Māhirahira Audit and Risk Subcommittee. And welcome back from the break. It's our first meeting after our July recess. Please note the meeting is being live streamed, and please let me or a Democracy Advisor know if you're leaving the meeting, because we only have exactly a quorum right now. So if we need a bathroom break, just let me know. We'll adjourn. Don't just stand up from the table and wander off. That would be a problem. Apologies. I've got apologies from Councillor Rush and from Liz Kelly. Do I have a seconder for those apologies, please? Thank you, Councillor Pannett. I'll put that motion. If you could please vote accordingly. Oh. Accessibility. Oh yeah, you've got to leave it up there. Apparently we need a photograph.
We've been busy.
So we had some public feedback that it was previously green and red when the vote came up, but colourblind people wanted to be able to look at the photograph and couldn't see what it was. So now we've got accessible ticks and crosses. Thank you, DEM Services. It's like an exciting present for us to come back to after recess. All right, do I have any conflict of interest declarations? I see none. Confirmation of minutes. I move the motion that we approve the minutes of the Kāwai Māhirahira Audit and Risk Subcommittee meeting from the 9th of June. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Mr. Brain Reaper. Linda, yes. Well, I'm not. Technically, it's a formal meeting. I'm not supposed to call her Linda. Thank you very much, Ms. Reaper. Can we put that motion, please? Please vote accordingly. All right, we have no items not on the agenda, but we do have a public participant today, which is a very rare thing for the subcommittee, so very excited to welcome Alison to the table. Alison Jones, if you want to come up and join us. Hello, welcome. Come and have a seat. Jennifer will get you situated. So thanks for coming to join us today. Alison, you've got 5 minutes to speak to us today, and if you want, that will have to include time for any questions, if you'd like time for questions. Over to you. You've got the time right up here to keep an eye on.
All right, thank you. Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa. Wellington City Council Audit and Risk Subcommittee, ko Alison Jones aho, and I'm here firstly as a Wellington ratepayer, and secondly as a representative of outdoor workers and female outdoor warriors, being garden maintenance and postal workers, and the general public, who were disadvantaged by the lack of open toilet facilities in the Wadestown area and the botanical gardens. This was an important health and safety concern, particularly as being a mature postal worker myself. I accept it was during extraordinary circumstances, but the lack of signage and closed public facilities was very disappointing and extremely inconvenient. I'd like to request of the Wellington City Council, should there be an escalation of alert levels, can these facilities please be kept open? While there were 8 public toilets open, that was in the general Wellington area and not up in the hills of Wadestown. Ngā mihi, Alison Jones.
Kia ora, thank you. Thanks very much, Alison, for coming to share that with us. Do we have any questions, councillors? Well, I won't use Alison's time for that. I guess I will ask Alison, can you tell us a bit about what your role is and why the public toilets, access to that is so important for you, especially during higher alert levels?
Well, it's just, I talked to a couple of Aspen Garden women workers at the Wadestown public library toilets, and they were quite inconvenienced by not having access. While we were actually still working at this time, there were large numbers of the public using the great outdoors like they never did before. The weather was extremely fine. I couldn't even walk down some streets because there was so much public walking there at the same time. Granted, they might have been closer to their homes, and during that time, it's not like you can knock on someone's door and say, excuse me. The public facilities, when I made a complaint to the council, the reply I got was that it was a health and safety concern and PPE. I said that wasn't good enough because I'm sure they would have had sufficient PPE to clean the other 8 areas that were open. So I talked to somebody, I got a reply, I wasn't very happy with that, and that's why I'm here.
Thank you. Any other questions for Alison while she's with us? Is this an issue, I was just wondering, is this an issue at alert level 2 as well, or is it only at the higher level?
This was an escalation of, granted that the time was quite short. I think it was the alert level 3 when it suddenly went to alert level 4. So it was more or less alert level 4 in particular.
Okay, that's useful to know. Thank you. There being no further questions, thank you very much for coming in, Alison. Really appreciate hearing about health and safety. And yes, Councillor Pennant, if you've got a question for officers now, we can take that.
So,
do we have officers in the room?
no, we don't. So I'm just oh, okay, Meredith. Or
I did not recognise you with your banging hair.
yeah, I know. It's amazing. I know.
Hi.
So, sorry, I'm just wondering if we can follow up for Ms Jones so we can provide a comprehensive response. Sorry, usually we'd do this through the Community Services kind of committee.
What's the question?
So you will follow up with your colleague to make sure that we get a response back? And
Yes, absolutely. I also recall the time when we went through and made this decision with it, and you were right, it was a very short time frame to make a lot of decisions around the city and whether or not we kept facilities open. This was also a discussion that was going across local government at the time, not having really clear guidance from government as well. We had 9 sites open for public toilets, but we do take your feedback on board. Fingers crossed this never happens again and we don't have to deal with it. But at the time it was a health and safety decision based on trying to minimise the exposure of those cleaners. And yes, they did have additional PPE, but we were also mindful that for the majority of people, they were at home unless they were essential workers. Obviously, Postal included that, and that they should have, for those that weren't working, they should have been staying within a block or 2 from their homes, so toilets weren't an issue for us at that point, at that time, but we do take that feedback on board.
And also, I guess sometimes people may have medical conditions or disabilities where that might be relevant consideration too.
Yes, yeah, but again, this was alert level 4 and they weren't supposed to be far from home unless they were essential workers. And with the timeframes, we thought that the 9 toilets that we kept open were sufficient, but as I said, it's good feedback to have going
thank
forward.
you.
Meredith, could I just ask, given that this was particularly about alert level 4, what reflection have we done as an organisation about lessons learned from that if we were unfortunate enough to have to go back to alert level 4? I assume we've done some kind of capturing of what worked and what didn't work. How has that gone forward?
Yes, no, we have debriefed how we went about it, including Taituara as a local government source of information, and they have a number of resources from lessons learned from all councils, not just us. We have also updated our pandemic response plan, and having gone up and down the alert levels a few times now, back up to 2, and we do believe that each time we've gained further lessons and we have taken those forward with us.
Thanks, Meredith. Was there any other questions while she's here? All right. Thank you, Meredith. And thank you, Alison, for coming in. And thank you for doing all your postal working while we were still at alert level 4.
All right,
That's much appreciated.
I was thinking that there possibly could be an arrangement, should there be something like that, with the Wadestown Library, if we could use a private little key for postal workers, possibly.
All right, that's something we can certainly think about. Thanks very much, Alison. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to come in and speak to us. All right, on to general business. I've got the first item on our agenda is the Audit New Zealand Governing Body Report. I don't have to invite officers to the table because you're already here at the table. But I'll hand it over, first of all, to kind of give us a bit of an introduction to this paper.
All right, thank you, Chair. I will take the report as written, but what I will do is just draw your attention to a couple of things. One is this report relates to last year's audit. And in the covering paper, I sort of just very quickly outline what the audit report was. So we had a what's called a non-standard audit report, and it comprised of an unmodified opinion, qualified opinion, and an emphasis of matter. So the financial statements were unmodified, which meant that audit were happy that the financial statements gave a true and fair view. The modified, but really if related to, the qualified opinion related to the performance information, which has quite a large segment within the audit report, in the audit management report itself. I think there's quite a comprehensive response there to the issues that Audit New Zealand have raised. And I think it's fair to say that where we can do something, we will. Where it's not practical or the cost benefit of doing so, we will have to accept that we won't meet these requirements going forward until such times as things change. So happy to take any questions.
Excellent. I have a question to start with, and then I'll take a speaking list. Thanks, Councillor Pannett. If we could start just looking at those, the progress we've made on the water performance reporting. Can we get a little bit of an update on kind of how we've been going against improving on those sorts of things? So I think the impression I get is that for a number of them, there's been significant progress that's been made, but for the water loss, that one's a bit more tricky. You talk about significant capital investment. Can you talk a bit more about that for us?
I'm actually going to pass it over to a colleague who's going to hopefully know more. Baz, as these are performance measures.
More detail. In essence, most of the detailed responses outlined in the paper here, we're happy to make. Some people from Wellington Water are available to speak to those in the future, but at this point in time, they're not available to do that. So I can't answer those questions in more detail at this point in time.
I guess I think it would be useful for us to kind of understand better as a committee how the progress is being made on that, since it was the matter that was qualified. But since we do understand that it's a matter for Wellington Water, but I assume, Karen, you're with us, that this will be something that will be coming up again as you launch into your audit of this year's financial statements. Yeah. Okay.
So I think it's appropriate that Wellington Water assist Wellington City with its response, and the audit of Wellington Water is taking place. So until such time it reaches a conclusion, I don't think we're able to say any more.
Yeah. Okay. I had Councillor Pannett with a question.
Yeah, few. So, Karen, can I just start with you? And I'm sorry, I've probably forgotten. There seems to be an expectation that we would have lots of water meters, but as you know, it's expensive and highly political. So, are you saying that to get a better audit opinion, we need these water meters?
Yes, the current methodology, which is bench loss methodology, does rely on having water meters. I guess it's not really for me to say whether that is a good thing or not, or whether other methodologies were able to provide an accurate picture of water loss. That is something which Wellington Water and yourselves will need to consider.
But it does read like we won't get a better audit opinion until we have water meters. Or do we need to change the methodology to something that's more affordable, and obviously getting accurate information?
I think that's a question for yourselves together with Wellington Water. water.
Okay, so
Hold on,
Councillor
I think we've
Condi.
got some staff who might want to be able to respond to your question as well.
Yeah, okay, that would be helpful.
Councillor, the measure, the DIA measure, is about a citywide water loss, and the measure that we report on is a regional one. So the issue isn't whether we have water meters or not, it's about whether we can report at a city or region, a city view as opposed to a regional view.
So if we had street meters, would we be able to give that information?
That would certainly assist in giving us that information, yes.
Okay. Look, Karen, or maybe it's a question for staff, I'm not sure. It just feels like we've had some big problems. I was on the phone to the chair of the Water Committee back in 2019 saying, fix this. It feels like we're now going into 2022 and we're going to have a repeat. And I'm just wondering if there's any way that we can, I know, I've read obviously what's being done to try and improve things, but whether we can do even more. It just seems very unsatisfactory.
I guess the response to that is that at the time that Wellington Water were in committee as part of the long-term plan, they did talk about the investments required in this space. As part of the long-term plan, we have agreed additional investment in the three waters, in part also going towards water meters, so we get a better understanding of loss in the network over time. They're also quite open with us at that point in time that it wasn't going to be a quick fix, that actually it was going to take a period of time and investment before they're going to get better data to inform that. So that was made clear to us at that point in time, and so we've got the investment in the LTP, but it will take some time before we start getting good data through.
Okay. And can I just ask about the weather tightness issues? I think I'm going to arrange a briefing for Councillor Paul and myself. We just need to, in our portfolio or our chair roles. But how do we know if we are doing enough to make provision for these buildings and that we're not causing more problems? I see that you got an assessment done, which was really useful, but this is still a significant area of risk for us, and we should be trying to reduce the liability over time, right?
There's two parts to the weather tightness. One is where we have known claims. So there we have a reasonable handle around what that's likely to cost us. There's another component which is non-notified claims. So in other words, claims that are potentially out there but we don't know about them yet. And that's where we use actuary services to try and help us predict what that level will be. We're sort of at the end of the chain. What you're raising is about consenting processes and the robustness of our portion of how we enforce the building rules, and that will then mitigate our liability around that aspect. And I'm unable to comment on that.
The claims are basically, given the water tight services has finished, that basically people can take a civil claim any time, because I keep hearing whispers that we're still building leaky buildings. So could this go on for many years?
There's a 10-year limit that people have to make a claim from the final consenting. So from the CCC document that they get, that's 10 years from there, and then once that's finished, then our liability stops.
Sorry, given that most of the leaky buildings were built in the mid-90s, early 2000s, we would have expected that 10-year would have finished, which is why I was just asking if people can take civil claims, or are we expecting that more people are building leaky buildings since 2005? So I obviously need to get some more information.
Yes, Councillor, I think we might be better to get the right people in the room to talk talk to the council about leaky buildings more generally, and yeah, I don't think we've got the right people around this table to actually answer the questions that you're asking.
Further questions? I had another one just about the notes about procurement and project management. There was some recommendations for us to look at, and there was some management comment there about what's been going on there. I guess my question kind of for Karen is, you've seen some of the management response, and is this going, do you feel like the response is heading in the right direction in terms of the concerns that you were raised? Do you see any gaps in the management response? Anything that you'd like to add there? Yeah, okay. And I think it's probably an issue that we want to think about in terms of how under the new committee structure, who's kind of keeping an eye on these things, because I think the project management work probably sits under the infrastructure committee, but the procurement stuff, I believe, sits under finance and performance. So I think, as this committee, we need to just make sure that we're conscious of how that is progressing under the goals of other committees that are looking at those things as well. I don't see any further questions. Oh, Mr. Tiffin.
Yeah, just. Yeah, is it working now? Yeah. In future, between the auditors and management, we could get this a little bit earlier, because we're into the next audit already. And that means, because it's late to management, they have less chance of getting a timely response. So we're now a year later.
And can you give us an update about the next management letter that we're expecting to see would be for the long-term plan audit? Are we on track to have that in a timely fashion?
Thank you, Roy. Thank you, Councillor. It has been well noted and agreed that management reports will be provided to Council in a more timely manner, and yes.
Thank you, Karen. I saw that on the Ford program. It's certainly on our agenda for our next meeting. So, further questions on this item? All right. There being none, then I will move the motion that we receive the information and content of the report. Committee, how do we want to follow up, particularly with Wellington Water? We just kind of have some questions that we've raised that we want to come back to us. Are we happy to just have an email come back to us? Councillor Panner?
When are they coming to the infrastructure committee? Because they're going to come in regularly, aren't they? So we could just wrap up.
We could follow that up as part of the infrastructure committee.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most sensible.
All right. I will put my other hat on and follow that up in that role. Excellent. Was there anything else that kind of came out of that discussion we need to make sure is followed up?
Tightness, and then maybe when I talk to Beth, we could just look at if other committee members want some more information. Yeah, okay.
Right. Is there any further debate? Oh, I'd need a seconder. Who'd like to second the motion? Thank you, Mr. Tiffin. Do we have any debate? All right. Excellent. That being said, having moved, the motion can be put and we can all vote on that, please. Lovely. Okay, our next item on our agenda is the Audit New Zealand audit plan for June 2021. So this is the audit plan for our end of year financial statements. With officers at the table, who would like to introduce Richard again? Are you going to give us a quick rundown? Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I guess this is just an opportunity for the committee to have a look at the audit plan and have assurance that you feel that it's a robust and appropriate audit plan and scope, and gives you opportunity to add to the scope if you feel that there's something been missed. I will point out that in terms of the timing, we're looking to adopt on the 28th of October. So there's a slight difference to what we've previously set before the committee, and we'll come back to you with a more definite timeframe and audit program in terms of what you will see and what the other committees will see and when. So we're just working through the finer points of that with audit as we speak, but we expect that to be done fairly soon. The other aspect that you would normally see within the audit plan is the fees. And again, we're just working through some of the issues there, but I have signalled that there will be a fee increase for this year, and that was signalled in previous years that there was going to be a change. I'm happy for Karen to talk to that further, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Karen, is there anything you'd like to add before we go to questions? Thank you. All right, questions? I guess I can start by just asking about the timetable and just can you give us a bit more information about why it's a bit later than it might normally be? We would normally expect to see it with the plan, and how, Karen, we were talking about kind of a different approach to the audit this time around, and can you tell us a bit about how we're planning on doing the audit differently this year compared to in previous years?
Sure. We've been talking to Wellington City about how to make life easier for everyone, just reflecting on some lessons learned in a COVID environment last year as well, and more generally. And also our learnings from the long-term plan audit. So we've agreed with Wellington City it is best, and this will ensure statutory deadlines are still met, but I think a smoother and a kinder process is to allow Wellington City the time to prepare its annual report and then us come in and audit it, as opposed to doing that in tandem, which is just very hard on everyone because you're putting down, picking up. This will also allow officers to complete their QA and review of the document in its entirety. And all this really means is shifting the audit back by about 2 weeks and still meeting your statutory deadline. So the statutory deadline for the signing of local government opinions has moved due to some urgent legislation passed in Parliament. However, we intend to, and have agreed with Wellington City, we will complete the audit within the original statutory deadline. Wellington City, along with a handful of other councils, are large and complex organisations, and completing the audit within the statutory deadline will allow Wellington City to move on and get on with its other business, such as turning its attention to the delivery of the long-term plan.
Further questions? Councillor Pennant?
Thanks, Karen. So essentially, except with a few minor changes, this is really just business as usual?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And how often does Audit New Zealand take a more fundamental look at what it might need to change in its auditing practices, or is that just kind of an iterative process?
It's an iterative process. Certainly changes in auditing standards is a trigger, as well as good practices. We're continuously reviewing our technology needs and how we respond to identified risks. So as part of every audit, we review and update the environment, the operating context, business risks and issues, and develop an audit response to those issues.
So the Climate Commission's work would be part of that? RMA reform, water reform, everything the government's doing. Because I guess I'm just curious about how the machinery of government didn't take on or didn't understand some risks which are now fairly apparent. You know, so like for example around climate change. So I guess it's just a question really about how broad Audit New Zealand goes to make sure that it's taking on account of all the information.
Wellington City is required to meet certain reporting requirements, and we audit to that, as well as our own standards around. The Auditor General has particular auditing standards which builds on the international auditing standards. Wellington City has financial reporting and other practices which it's required to meet, and all of that is taken into consideration and factored into the audit. Thank you.
Mr. Tiffin?
Working. One of the reasons that the auditors come to this meeting is to see if there's anything that we know that they should be aware of, and to adapt your plan suitably. Now, when I was thinking about this, I realised, of course, we've had the long-term plan audit recently, and pretty well all of the potential items for the audit would have come up in that. Is that correct, Karen?
Yes, that's correct, Roy. We have factored it into the audit plan.
Yeah, so when I looked through this, I wasn't kind of surprised at anything because it's what we've been discussing in the last few months and before. But I thought that the Chair might like to see if there's any member of the committee who has got anything that's special. Otherwise, it is business as usual, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess, one of my questions would be that, Karen, particularly some of the issues that we had when we had an emphasis of matter in our long-term plan, and to what extent those have been carried forward into the audit plan. Some of them I can see. For example, one of the emphasis of matter was around our ability to deliver the capital program. And when you're looking at things like procurement and project management, I can see that connection. Are there other, connections between the the findings of your long-term plan audit and how this plan has been developed you can tell us about?
Yes, there is, Chair. By way of, the cut-off is 30th of June for what's included in the financial statements, performance information more generally. However, there may be post-balance date events which give rise to adjustments or further disclosures. By way of example, if an agreement is entered into with central government around sludge or housing, that those are big items in terms of potential dollars or qualitatively. So a materiality lens will be applied to that. And so even if it occurs after balance date, but before we sign the audit opinion, some disclosure may be warranted in the annual report. And that is similar to the disclosures Wellington City Council made around its insurance claim last year.
I guess one of my questions was, it says in the audit plan you're going to be looking at the Mayoral Task Force review of 3 waters, and I just was curious about how you would go about auditing that. Some of the other things I can kind of be like, I can see how you would audit that, but this one I was just interested in what that part of the audit would involve.
That's a very good question, Chair. That would involve just Wellington City's response to the Mayoral Task Force findings and the recommendations which it has, largely accepted.
Any further questions or for Karen or for our staff? I don't see any. in which case I will move the motion that we receive the information, that we note the report and these 2 delegations that we're delegating the audit plan to the Chief Financial Officer and myself, and we're delegating the audit fees letter to the Mayor and the Chief Financial Officer as well, so that we can get those things finalised. Can I have a seconder for those recommendations? Thank you, Councillor Paul. Do we have any debate? Was there anything that people kind of wanted to put on the table in terms of the scope of the audit report, or things that we'd like Karen to be looking at?
Now's the chance.
Now's our chance. All right, I don't see any debate. In which case, I will move us to a vote. And that's carried. Thank you. Our next item is the Waka Kotahi NZTA audit report. So, Brad, hello, welcome. I'll hand it over to you to introduce us to this item.
Afternoon, councillors. Welcome back. This is the Waka Kotahi audit. Waka Kotahi audited us last year. They normally do 2 types of audit. One is a procedural audit and one is a technical audit. The procedural audit looks at things like our financial services, how we're managing our claims, how we're managing the money we pay to contractors, and whether they can believe that the claim that we're putting against them every month is actually trackable back to the general ledger. They also look at our procurement services and how we do our contract tendering and managing that, and whether that's following best practice. And then they do a technical audit, which looks more at how we're dealing with the network, how we're managing the transport network, and whether we're either gold plating the network and unnecessarily spending money, or whether we seem to be managing the network in an appropriate way. The audit in general was quite a good audit in some aspects. There were some safety issues that were raised in the audit. There were some question marks around value for money and whether we were delivering value for money, particularly in the maintenance and renewal space. But our financial systems all passed really well. Our procurement systems all passed really well, and we had some glowing commendations on the way we're actually managing those parts of our business. Overall, the findings from Waka Kotahi were relatively, in my opinion, easy to overcome. We are either in a situation where we've completed some of the actions and recommendations that they've put on us, or we are on track to complete them. I'm happy to take any questions on recommendations, actions, etc.
Questions, Ms. Reaper? Councillor Pennant.
Are you able to just expand on the cost, which they believe is quite high for Wellington compared to others?
Yeah, so Waka Kotahi use a measure of cost per kilometre, so dollars per kilometre spent on the network. It's quite a crude measure, but ultimately it's the only way that they can measure all councils equally. From a dollars per kilometre, KPI, I guess, we are the highest in the country. So as a council, we spend the most dollars per kilometre than any other council. A large portion of that could be attributed to the amount of assets we have per kilometre. So if you were to think about Wellington versus other cities, Wellington has more walls and bridges and tunnels in a kilometre space than anywhere else. And those walls typically are keeping the road up, so they're significant assets. So when you look at street lights as well, we have more street lights, we have more signs in a kilometre area than most other councils. That accounts for some of it, but they also pinpointed our resurfacing program, which is 50% of our maintenance and renewals program in a year, and they felt like we were delivering a level of service that was greater than other councils because 50% of our road resurfacing was done in asphalt. And so they felt that that was higher than any other council in terms of ratios, and asphalt is 4 times the cost of other treatments. And so we were asked to look at that in terms of the level of service that we're providing in that space.
Thanks.
Can I
Brad,
just-
beyond, just to follow up on that question, you know, so we've got, why are we more expensive? Partly we've got a lot more assets per kilometre, partly chip seal. Is there a remainder there that we still aren't quite sure about? How far do those two things get us in terms of explaining the difference?
Quite far.
Okay.
Quite far, particularly the chip seal asphalt. So we've done some significant analysis on that with the transport strategy team. All documented in our asset management plan. It's quite a significant jump down by us making some small tweaks in that space.
Mr. Swiffen?
So if I heard that correctly, to save money, we're going to have a less efficient seal on the roads, so a chip seal. As a cyclist, I know I've left some of myself on that chip seal. And it's is that actually what we're going to do? We're going to reduce the quality of the surface to save money?
Oh, this is such a loaded topic. So effectively, we're going to be using more chip seal. We're going to be using more chip seal. Whether it's a less efficient or a worse product than asphalt is something that's up for debate, which we could probably do at another time. But yes, we're going to be using more chip seal across the city.
The staff have done significant work on how chip seal performs compared to asphalt. In a number of ways it performs better. Cyclists is the one area where we're very conscious that it does not deliver the service level, and that's something councillors have been very conscious of. I know we've had many conversations about how as we move to more chip seal, how we deal with that safety element of that service for the impact on cyclists. Brad, did you want to talk, because we have done a little bit about what we can do for cyclists on that, looking at finer grain chip and...
So we are looking at different products particularly for cycle lanes. And that is using finer grades of chip, doing better aftercare on it so that it actually performs a little bit better than what we're used to seeing in terms of chip seal. And we're also exploring different products. So one of the things that Waka Kotahi asked us to look at was, besides chip seal and asphalt, what other products are out there that we could use? In the South Island, they've got other products. We don't have that in the North Island. So we're working this year with all the other councils in the region to try and bring some new products into the region so that we all have some different products that we could use on the road.
Okay.
Further questions?
Bit technical.
It's very technical. He has a great presentation. He takes it out to all the residents' associations. Any further questions? Yeah, Councillor Pannett.
Well, first of all, well done on getting a good audit. Obviously there's a lot of expertise there. So without being facetious, I understand that that we have quite a lot of high-powered cars in this country, so SUVs are very popular. Do we need to provide such a high level of service for our roads? Obviously for cyclists, I'm very sympathetic, Roy, but for private car use?
No. So in terms of why we resurface the road, it's to prevent moisture from getting in, because once moisture gets in, then the road degrades really quickly. And to do that, you need to keep the surface waterproof. And the only thing that keeps the surface waterproof is chip seal. So even when we put asphalt down, there's a layer of chip seal underneath it. So effectively, the asphalt is more of an amenity thing, or certain areas where chip seal won't work. Steep areas or windy corners and stuff like that there. So offering that sort of increased level of service there is no real warrant for it.
Right. Look, the more serious question is around the reduction in road deaths and serious accidents, and I guess I found 7.1 a little bit underwhelming. I think road safety is really complex, and it's more than just looking at a few minor engineering things. And also, of course, Councillor Condi and I were very insistent on increasing the budget for minor safety improvements. So hopefully that will help. But I guess I think we need a stronger response than just looking at a safety review where immediate low-cost engineering solutions can be introduced. Doesn't seem like enough.
Yeah, fair enough to take that point. Analysis shows that the bulk of these crashes and serious injuries are happening on our rural arterials, so the more rural roads. And so that's why we wanted to actually look at those roads in terms of our arterials, because what we're seeing on the arterials is that we're not seeing a trend of decreasing crashes. It's actually either staying the same or increasing. And when we look at stuff that could typically help, things like Thorn and Key stood out in terms of the amount of crashes that were happening on Thorn and Key and the amount of accidents that were happening there. So there you could see a small tweak and a small change could result in some significant benefit in terms of reducing that. Obviously, this will result in some longer-term, bigger projects as well that may come out. But what we know for certain is that the places where we have the bulk of our accidents and crashes and injuries is intersections. So intersections is kind of our main spot, and you don't need a lot of money to fix an intersection. You can go in there with 100 grand, 200 grand, you could fix an intersection and make it a lot safer with just that amount of money.
So will you be giving that review to the Infrastructure Committee so we can have a look at it?
Sure.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. Also, that road, there was a death by the landfill, that road.
Happy Valley Road?
Yeah. Has that been looked into?
Yeah, that'll be part of the review.
Yes, please, that was terrible. But I guess, the challenge would be to take a broader view on road safety too.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thanks, Brad. I just had a question about road opening operations. So it says we were doing generally well, but notably we needed to do better on road opening operations. And I actually wasn't clear what that means.
Yeah, it's
what is that? Because it sounds like I'm going to go cut a ribbon and open a road, but I don't think that's what it means. So.
It's people with grit under their fingernails that know what that means. It's a road opening operation is pretty much when a third party, it could be Wellington Water, Wellington Electricity, Chorus, digs up the road. So they dig up the road to do some work, and the way they put it back, we've got a code of practice as to how they need to put it back. One of the findings was we weren't holding them to account in terms of that code of practice, meaning that after they put it together, we've got a year's warranty on it, and beyond that, the council's liable for any fixes. And so it's meaning that we're going back and fixing something that somebody else should have done properly.
So how are we responding? I saw on the responses it says we've had WSP undertaking a review. How are we going on that to make sure that we are actually going back and checking that it's complying? So
the review from WSP was we've got a fairly new crew of a team that's in that space now. And so WSP did a piece of work for us where they went across the country and pulled out best practice in terms of how we do this. They've put together a document for us. We're now training our team on how to do that, and we're going to start doing that effectively from next month, starting to actually go out and look at the trenches that we've got across the city.
And do you have the resources that you need to be able to follow up on all of the third party? Because I imagine that's, especially with the amount of money we've just given to Wellington Water, especially a lot of sites around the city. Do we have the resources to be able to make sure that we're keeping on top of that?
That's something we're looking at the moment.
Any further questions? I don't see any. In which case, thanks very much, Brad, and thanks for all your team's work. It's great to hear that for the most part we got a really good audit and some great feedback, and the way that the teams responded to the areas that needed work has been exceptional as well. So we really appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right. So I will be moving the motion that we note the finding actions that have been put in front of us. Can I have a seconder, please? Ms. Reaper, thank you. Is there any debate? Councillor Pennant.
Yeah, sorry, I should have asked Brad when we had the chance. I guess I'm not a big fan of NZTA, it's quite well known. And so I guess, look, it's good to get, you've obviously got to get your technical things right, but I guess I'm just interested in how this works in terms of the bigger picture and what we're doing about climate change to make sure that all our infrastructure is protected. And when it comes to NZTA, road safety is looked at in a very narrow way, which I don't agree with. So obviously, Councillor Paul and I will be working hard on getting cycleways built to help with some of that and better walking infrastructure. Yeah. Councillor Foon will be, actually getting the shovels out to build them. But I guess I just would like to challenge the organisation that we do need to take that broader perspective. And when we've got such a individualistic approach to transport, we are going to get those problems and problems of entitlement, that people feel they have some rights, which is unfortunate. But I'm really pleased to hear that things like Thorndon Quay, Happy Valley Road, that will be looked at, because that's just not acceptable, and we should have a zero tolerance approach. And ultimately we're responsible. If those numbers are not going down, we're not doing enough, and I think we need to hold ourselves to account on that as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. I think that might be another area where the Infrastructure Committee might ask for some monitoring, because I know, as having been the portfolio leader, that there is a lot of really good work that sits behind that in terms of our data around road safety and where our issues are, where our DSIs in the city are coming from, and what we can do and how we've been prioritising the work to make sure that we're getting good value for money in terms of tackling the most serious issues first. So that might be another area where it would be useful for the Infrastructure Committee to see some of that. That's what's sitting behind that. Because I've always found that an interesting one. At this committee we look at health and safety, but we often think about it that that's health and safety of our staff and our contractors. We don't always extend that to thinking about health and safety of the people on using our infrastructure on the roads and whatnot. So I think it is an important issue we keep an eye on as well. Any further debate? There being none, I would like to put that to the vote, please. That is carried. On to our final item on our agenda is our forward program. Is this, in terms of staff, is this you, Stephen, who's introducing the forward program?
I can do.
On the spot.
Yes, this, bearing in mind that we've had, we'll have 2 meetings within a fairly quick succession as opposed to our quarterly meeting. This agenda kind of looks more like our normal quarterly agenda for this committee. I'd just point out that we've got the strategic risk profile on this agenda, but and you should have had the invite in terms of the calendar, in terms of a workshop with Audit and Risk Committee with all councillors invited, and that's for within a couple of weeks' time. It's not to kind of start with a clean slate, because you might remember that workshop we did maybe 12 or 14 months ago, so it's building on that, and ELT had a first look at that yesterday, so that will precede that particular item coming forward in September. The rest of it's what you would probably expect to see on the agenda, apart from legislative compliance update, which is a process Richard's team runs across the organisation in terms of managers' declarations around legislative compliance in terms of the business, and that will be summarised up in terms of a report back to this committee.
One of the things we had been talking about previously, and Councillor Pennant and I had this conversation as well, is around how we monitor the strategic risk profile going forward, and we had the conversation about possibly choosing a strategic risk or an area to kind of highlight at each meeting so we can get the correct operational staff in the room to have those conversations. Is that something that we could look at, kind of picking now what we might like to have on our next agenda in terms of who we could have in the room for that conversation?
Yes, it's been a conversation you might remember at this meeting last time we came together, there was a question about which risks might go through ordinary committees, the committee structure. So weather type, for example, you could look at that in terms of probably planning and the planning committee under Councillor Pannett's chairpersonship. But I think maybe what we could do is at that workshop, when you've reviewed that risk profile, perhaps identify then what that forward program of risks that you would like to see come back, because they will change a little bit in terms of the way we're thinking about presenting it to be more targeted and focused post the LTP adoption, because what we've got now, it's kind of themed up and it's, there's a lot in it as opposed to now that the LTP's been signed off, being really targeted.
Because we had talked about possibly saying, oh, maybe we want to do a deep dive into social housing, since that was one of the issues that had come up during the long-term plan, but essentially identifying kind of deep dives for the meeting coming up. So is that workshop scheduled for prior to the 15th of September?
Yes,
so
it's within a couple of weeks' time. And I think,
okay.
And I think maybe at that workshop you could talk through what comes here and what goes through the committee structure. So let's just say social housing, that may be more relevant for the committee that owns that as opposed to this, but happy to have that conversation.
Yeah, because that's, I think, been an ongoing conversation in this committee, is how we do the strategic risk monitoring and what our role is.
Yes, what the role of this committee is versus others, and kind of what focus you want to give it.
And we've been having that same conversation, just to let you know, about the health and safety report, because the health and safety report comes to this committee and also to the Finance and Performance Committee. And so I've been having that conversation with Meredith and with the chairs of the other committee about how we coordinate, what the role is of the different committees when we're looking at those health and safety reports. So I think there's still a little bit of figuring out under the new structure that we've got.
Yes, because I think last time when James and Hein came to talk about
that was great.
Cyber security, that was really insightful.
Yeah, I found that really helpful. And then it came up in another document. I was like, oh, I know all about patching now because I had the briefing. And it was in this document, yes. Yeah, Roy.
Just as far as mundane things like actual dates, because that Linda and I have a couple of other things that sometimes clash. So there's this, the one we were talking about is on the 19th of August. And then there are 2 workshops. Richard, you have one, don't you? Is that date?
It's on the annual report.
On the annual report, and Lloyd has another. Oh, Lloyd's not here. The workshop or the meeting?
What we'll do is in the next week or so pull all those dates together and send that around the committee so that you can see workshops, committees, all in one spot.
Because those 2 workshops which we traditionally had in September are really useful. But they need to be in the right time. You don't need to be preparing the financials just for a workshop of this committee. There are other reasons. Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll
get the timing of those finalised shortly.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
But yeah, so just to flag that this, having the forward program is a chance for us to talk about what's, making sure that we're happy with what's coming up and how those things go. But I think the workshop, particularly around risk, will give us a chance to do that. And it was good to see, we asked last time to see kind of having a standing item around an update from internal audit, a standing item update from other places. So it's nice to see that on the agenda. I will move that we receive this information. Can I have a seconder, please? Reaper, and is there any further debate, discussion about what's here? Councillor Pannett, please.
So I look forward to us developing a common forward program so we can be rigorous about this. I guess my reflection would be that we haven't done enough around risk. And we need to do a lot more. So I would welcome, obviously, the input of this committee as well as all the other committees, and we just obviously have to coordinate. That's all. Thank you.
Anyone else? Yep. So I think, Councillor Pennant, I'm very conscious I agree with you, and I think that's something that we're on a journey and we're moving in the right direction. So I think, the workshop will give us a chance, and then having this forward program and having being able to have a conversation about what kind of reporting we want about risk will hopefully help us make progress on that going forward. That being said, if there's no further debate, I will put this to the vote. That is carried. And that was a very speedy meeting, everybody. So I declare the meeting closed. Well done, us. Please stand for the closing karakia. Unuhia, 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 ki te uru tapu nui. Kia wātea, kia mama, ngāko, te tinana, te wairua. I te ara takatu. Koia rā e ro, whakaaria ake te runga. Kia wātea, ai rā, kua wātea.